And welcome to the next edition of Dream Reality with Idunn Consulting. So this is a podcast series where we talk to people who are innovators, who are change makers, who really challenge the norm and the status quo, who are happy with disruption and really want to take things to the next level and see opportunity in every situation. And this week, I am really excited to have our guest here with us, and it is Kelly. And Kelly is someone that I met during my MBA journey, and she has a really cool story and an even cooler job. And she was the head of business development at Skew, a FinTech company, which has just been taken over by Coinbase. So Kelly, over to you. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, well, firstly, Allison, let me thank you for having me on the podcast. It's always a pleasure to talk to fabulous women in the entrepreneurial space. But yeah, a little bit more about me. So I started my career off actually in financial marketing at an investment bank in New York City. I got out of university during the financial crisis back in 2008, 2009. And during that time, it was quite challenging to find a role. And I majored in business and focused on marketing. And I was able to take kind of the easiest role that came to me through my networking and through the process of interview elimination and kind of where I found the opportunity and the most success. And I moved into financial marketing at investment banks. And as my career continued to progress, I found myself in more and more senior roles at a variety of different offshore banks, so not American banks. I work for Canadian banks and Australian investment bank. And after some good strategic work I did at Macquarie Bank in New York, I was asked by the head of the EMEA team based in London to move over and lead a strategic kind of brand and marketing piece of work for the bank in EMEA. And at that time, I was in New York City for about 6 years. I'm from New York, lived in New York, and was really kind of open to change. I decided to basically not think too much about it and say yes. I knew nobody in London, have some family in Ireland and Norway, only went to London once for a couple of days, didn't really think. And the next thing I knew, under 4 weeks later, I had gotten a visa and moved over to the UK and was leading this brand project and kind of sales engagement effort at Macquarie for EMEA. Kind of fast forward to where I am today, 5.5 years later, I'm still in the UK. I have moved and really, I moved into somewhat of a similar, I guess, industry. But what I really had done is a lot of personal kind of work on what my values are and what excites me. And I've really thought about kind of the combination of technology and how it can really change and impact what financial services brings to both kind of the individual consumer and also businesses. And, you know, being at banks for the whole kind of foundation of my career, I saw a lot of challenges and had maybe some frustrations around kind of the ability to manage the needs of their customers. And as a result of that, I kind of found this intersection of tech and finance. And most recently, I have moved into cryptocurrency. I worked on building one institutional lending startup for crypto assets, and most recently moved to lead up business development globally for a data analytics company in crypto. And last week officially joined the Coinbase team on their institutional sales coverage team, helping corporations, institutions, investors, FinTech companies get exposure into crypto or understand why crypto is important, and giving them some of the products and services to help them understand the market and potentially get into the market for themselves, for their own businesses, or even to offer it to their customers.
Mm-hmm. Well, quite the journey. You know, it's although there's a bit of a common theme throughout, but I mean, really, you know, you've really challenged yourself throughout the journey, taken some risks, and then now are really, you know, leading the way in a sphere which I think is really going to take off and is really something that not that many people understand. Let's be quite, honest about it. It's a bit of a black box for a lot of people. But, and I think it's really interesting that you mentioned about values there and things. And did that really drive you? Did that really something that really helped you to focus and understand for yourself what was important, and then you let that help drive your future?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And I think some people might think it's a bit of a silly thing to do, a silly exercise, or maybe not come to terms with kind of understanding what drives them, or kind of, how they want to spend their time. And that's fine. But for me, I kind of went through a few personal challenges in my life here in the UK. And off the back of those, I really spent a lot of time trying to understand what like makes up who I am, and looking at some of my values, which are things like teamwork. I was a footballer and I grew up playing on teams. So teamwork was really important to me. The other thing that's really important to me was adventure. Like, I love to go and challenge myself and hike a mountain or move to another country. And I knew that was something that, was fundamental kind of to who I am. Risk taking, but also resiliency was something else that was really important to me. And being grateful was another thing, collaboration. And there were certain things that kind of, when brought together, I was able to kind of really see the light, I guess, for myself, and try to align myself with maybe not working at a 35,000 person company in financial services, maybe working at a 20-person company, while a huge shift allowed me to work in a team that was building something that I believed in, but was building it in a way, in a very collaborative way of working together and working through challenges, and all being relatively aligned, not trying to find, employee number 562 who might be able to help me, figure out a workflow process to bring a product to market that doesn't even maybe, understand that the product that we have been working on. So for me, there were some of these things that were really drawn out during that process and during that work I did personally. And as a result, I became very comfortable with risk taking when I understood why.
Yeah. And I can completely resonate with that, because it was kind of after looking at my values, which drove me to change my career. So I think it's quite a similar thread when you hear people that, have pivots or have, very clear directions. A lot of them do value work and understand their values. And it's interesting to see that come up time and time again. So going on to FinTech, I mean, and, a little bit on the whole cryptocurrency thing, now it's so much more in the media than even 12 months ago. And I think we can all thank Elon Musk for that. Rightly or wrongly, and I have an opinion, but I mean, I think we all have opinions on that. But do you think that that this is something that is, in the grand scheme of things, is that going to be helpful in the long term to help is this something that's really a product for the general public in the future? And this is, although it might not be necessarily helpful in short term, this publicity, whether positive or negative, is long term going to be good to normalize the cryptocurrency of the future?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And I think, to your point, where we are today, cryptocurrency has become much more mainstream than it was even a year ago. I think when we think about what a digital currency is, it might be hard for one to kind of tangibly envision that. But when we think about the way we live our lives today, most of us are not using paper, USD or GBP or the euro when we transact. And I think, the way that we're moving at a very quick pace to a much more virtual and digitalized environment, whether we like it or we don't. And one of the ways that, supports that theory is kind of this concept of crypto. some people might say that, you know, what is crypto and how can we kind of trust this? And some people, you know, there's a lot of questions around that. But when we think actually, and we dive in deep to the way, for example, the US dollar is backed up by the US government.
Yeah.
In the past, it used to be backed up by gold. But
Yeah.
when you actually dive in now and you research that, it's not backed up by gold anymore. There's not enough gold to back each and every US dollar.
Yeah.
So what is it backed by? You know, it's backed by the US economy, it's backed by trust, it's backed by, you know, kind of the Fed and the government. But, you know, there's questions around that too. And there's kind of, you know, some underlying maybe opinions around kind of what that might mean and why the Fed can print, you know, a lot of money and into the market when kind of the you know, policies need to kind of be supported in recessions, and there's a lot of questions, I guess, to be asked. So basically, crypto is, you know, this digital currency that I deeply, deeply think is here to stay. And I think if we look back to kind of the times of the internet boom, there was also a fundamental question around what is the internet? And a lot of people kind of were haters and didn't really believe in what was going to happen. People still today don't understand how the internet works, right? So I think in terms of crypto, there's a lot of people that don't understand how a blockchain works, what a protocol is, kind of the way in which you know, the cryptocurrencies on specific protocols are exchanged, or what that might mean. There's people that don't understand the security behind it, but at the end of the day, the internet works and we all use it, and we don't really know how it works, a lot of us. And I think it's the same kind of concept for crypto. And when kind of a lot of these companies, a company like Coinbase, for example, or, you know, there's many other companies out there, when they're able to kind of bring it mainstream and you're not kind of seeing the underlying infrastructure behind it, it makes things much easier in terms of payment cross-border. It makes things easier for countries that maybe don't believe in their own country currency, for example, that maybe want to invest in a different asset. It might be a, you know, a hedge to inflation, for example. It might be an asset that you want to diversify just out of equities and stocks and bonds and kind of other areas, and you want to invest in an asset class that has grown exponentially over time. So I think there's a lot kind of to be said for where things are going. I think there's still a lot of regulation and infrastructure that needs to catch up to be able to make it much more mainstream, and probably a bit more education. But I think we're much more closer to that today than we were even at the end of last year.
Yeah, I think totally. And just on that point, now that China has released its digital, or is releasing its digital currency, do you think now other countries are going to, because it's not exactly the same as the cryptocurrency, it's slightly different. So is that, as I understand it, and I'm not an expert, I've listened to a couple of podcasts and that's it, but is that something that other countries are going to follow? And is that going to really disrupt the way we think of cash and currency and transactions for the future?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think a lot is kind of to be determined, but there has been, you know, a number of kind of pieces out in the media and a number of discussions being had, for example, to my knowledge, and things are changing very, very quickly on a daily basis. So sometimes it's hard to keep up actually in the space, but like the Bank of England, for example, has been looking at ways in which they might be able to bring to market a CBDC, which is a central bank digital currency. So we're starting to see more use cases, more of the central banks looking at that. In the role that I do, I speak to a variety of kind of various like settlement providers that are sitting across different jurisdictions, that are advising government entities on kind of what digital currency may look like for a country or a specific jurisdiction. So, you know, I know those things are kind of in the works, but we all know, you know, governmental bodies and kind of regulators are always risk adverse. So their ability to kind of make decisions is very much led by, you know, the market maturity. And kind of, they like to take that back seat to kind of make the most thoughtful mature decision that they can. So they're always playing catch up, and that's just the way it goes. So
yeah,
we'll have to see. But yes, China is on the front foot there.
Mm. And as part of a fintech startup, I was reading an article in the Financial Times, and it kind of alluded that fintech startups are really there to be the innovators for banks and to be bought by banks so that banks don't die, essentially. What's your opinion on that? Are you just there to innovate and
Listen,
create I think products so that the banks can just buy you and use those products?
I think, you know, I think you can take a lot of various kind of angles to that. I think startups are fundamental to democratic economies, right? They're innovative, they drive change, they generate new ideas, they bring kind of, you know, that they're changing the world, basically, for lack of a better phrase. And every single startup has a potential, you know, proposed exit strategy. The founders look at, you know, what do we want to do, or what do we hope to do in, you know, 3 to 5 years or 10 years and beyond. Some want to go public and IPO. Some look to kind of get venture capital backing, and then potentially move on to get sold, to a company that has some sort of like symbiotic view, and you know, they have mutual benefits and mutual synergies there. You know, some companies are very happy to stay niche and just be very targeted and support a small client set, and they're very happy with just that. So I think it very much depends, I guess, on kind of the vision of the company and the founding team. However, I think banks have a real challenge now to catch up. And I think whether they like it or not, they have to take measures in order to adapt to the changing times. And what we're seeing is a lot of banks, coming in and looking at buying startups, buying fintech companies, buying payment providers, setting up innovation centers internally where they can actually bring startups to market by providing them some funding and maybe taking a small minor stake as an investor. But then depending on how some of these startups in their, you know, kind of intrapreneurial innovation hub perform, they might want to actually fully acquire them or take a larger stake in them, or actually completely, you know, merge them into their current operating model. I think, you know, what's driving all of that at the end of the day, and I talk to a lot of large institutions right now about crypto and kind of their position on crypto, and a lot of them are just coming in to try to understand and make sense of the market. It's driven by customers. So if customers can find a cheaper way to transfer money from, I don't know, the US to the UK, or they can find a cheaper, more efficient way to, you know, I don't know, get a specific, you know, financial product or whatever it might be, or if they have a need, if a high net worth client is coming to a bank and saying, I have $10 million and I want to invest in crypto, and they don't have the offering. These are just a couple of examples. They're losing revenue, they're losing commissions, they're losing the client, not just on that one product, but then potentially on the whole suite of products that they offer that client, because the client wants an integrated, seamless experience. So they're being driven by the market and by client need to change. And that's one example in crypto, why a lot of these companies are trying to understand the ecosystem and the market opportunity, not because they maybe want to, but because they have to. Otherwise, they will lose clients. They will lose clients to fintechs, and that's that. And, you know, I think the other thing to mention on that point is fintechs, or startups in general, are lean, mean, and agile. They can get things done much quicker than banks can. So it also can be a relatively strategic advantage for large institutions to come in and buy startups, because these startups are able to get things to market much quicker than they ever would have. And it would cost the banks 10 times more, the amount of time, resources, you know, and efforts basically to get that product to market when a startup already did that, and all they have to do is buy it for a relatively potentially cheap cost based on their current balance sheet.
Yeah, wow, a lot to think about there, but I think that that definitely makes sense, that, you know, they really need to be up to speed, and if this is the most cost-effective way and the most efficient way, because the banks are very bureaucratic, they're never going to be able to get there by themselves. You know, we all know the paperwork with banking. It's, you know, it's a joy to everyone, a joy.
Exactly.
You lose your card, everybody's happy about that scenario because it's so easy to get a new one.
Exactly.
But then just going on to the maybe the startup environment, because I know that you're somewhat involved with startups and the whole ecosystem and environment around them. So do you think that, you know, other people are identifying this period of the last 18 months as an opportunity? So do you see more ideas, more innovations, more companies looking for financing or being founded than maybe, you know, 2 years ago, and it's just people seeing this as an opportunity?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think the last 18 months has been really hard for a lot of startups. I think what has happened, and you might know this yourself, you know, a lot of startups plan, you know, 1, 3, 5 years out. Mostly in business school, they'll tell you to kind of make a 5-year plan, but basically, realistically speaking, you're planning 1 year out. Maybe you're lucky if you have somewhat of a scenario for 3 years, but it will change 1,000 times over. I think what really happened during the pandemic is that like companies, business plans basically had to completely get reworked and revamped and like rethought of, right, and reinvented. I think people had to kind of start almost from scratch to look at various like worst case scenarios, like do proper scenario planning. I think they needed to look at kind of their expenses versus costs and really think about how they might be able to cut back in order to sustain basically their payroll, or even if it was just a couple of founders, like if they were paying themselves, and just ensure that they can kind of keep the lights on. So it was basically just survival mode rather than kind of, you know, growth mode or kind of investing in the business potentially. So I think that caused a lot of pain and struggle for some startups. And I think what happened also on the investment side for investors, access to capital, while it may have, when we went digital, it may have opened you up to many more conversations with global investors or kind of folks that maybe you wouldn't initially have contact with in your city or kind of locally. I think investors, when there's a market kind of downturn and there's like an economic impact, no matter what, investors tend to be cautious. So, and when you think about it, investing in a startup is one of the most risky investments out there. You know, you're not putting your money in a bond or even kind of an, you know, security for that matter. You're putting your capital into, you know, a very kind of high risk, high return situation, which is always, you know, a great thing. But kind of when the market sees a downturn, I think people kind of want to take a wait and see approach. So I think in terms of new companies coming to market, you know, there's always new companies coming to market, but I haven't seen as many companies kind of coming to market in the last 6 to 12 to 18 months. But I've seen a lot of the startups just trying to put on their kind of like survival mode and trying to kind of get through.
And I, you know, I have to ask the question because you're a female working in FinTech, which is, you know, one, a tech space which is generally male dominated, and two, a financial area which is also mainly male dominated. So do you think that, do you see any change in that mix? Has the last 18 months shaken things up, or do you think it's the same and there's just little drip feeding more and more diversity coming in?
Yeah, so from my experience, the last three companies I've worked for in fintech and crypto, the first one I was at, I was one of three women. There was 25 of us. The second one I was at, Skew, which is the data analytics company, I was one of 20, and 19 were men. So I was the only woman. And most recently, I joined Coinbase, which I'm only on day 4, but they have a few thousand employees. And there's many more women that are part of that company. But of course, with a high growth company, there are many more functions. So there's functions like HR, there's functions that maybe are a little bit more, that women are a bit more interested in. So me sitting on the institutional coverage team in EMEA, so selling into, hedge funds or pension funds or banks or corporates, I'm the only woman on the team here in the UK. So I think still there's a lot of work to be done there. I think one of the areas of opportunity of the pandemic potentially could be around this work from home virtual environment, whereby you could potentially find ways to bring more talent and diversity to the surface from around the world. So, women maybe, for better or for worse, no opinion, but cater maybe more to kind of the family life at home in certain instances. Maybe it gives some of them more of an opportunity to actually be able to get involved in new industries or new areas of opportunity where they can kind of have a little bit more flexibility. That could be a really positive thing. Maybe it's bringing in people from various countries that you wouldn't otherwise have access to, or cheaper labor that actually, is not cheap for the local employees in a specific country, but for, others, it could be saving you some really, large, significant costs. So I think there are some really interesting opportunities to look at there. But from my perspective, I've been still kind of a one-woman show, and really advocate for more diversity and kind of females in the workforce, because I think we bring different soft skills to the table that can be really powerful when we combine them with males and with other diversity across the business.
Yeah, I hear you. And so last question, which is really, playing on the title of the podcast, with the dream and the reality. So you're very much into FinTech now. What is your dream for the future of FinTech? Where do you see it going? And then followed by, where do you think it will actually land?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question for quite a bit, and it's not an easy one. And I think the reason why and I know it's not supposed to be easy, but in FinTech, things move beyond the speed of light. Things move at an incomprehensible pace, and it's even the folks I work with, it's impossible to keep up. We can barely, keep track of what's happening, which is incredible. I think for me, where I'd love to kind of see FinTech go is to a place where everybody around the world has access to financial services. There are so many emerging markets and countries right now that don't have any access to bank accounts, to be able to send remittances back home, to be able to, generate a bit of interest on a savings account, or be able to learn how to invest very simply through a brokerage account or through a crypto app. And I think one of the things that blockchain and that the digital economy could possibly bring is exactly some of that financial freedom, because of the way that assets can be moved, can be traded, can kind of operate without borders, and can bring some of that financial freedom to the forward to people that maybe live more difficult lives than we do. So yes, I work maybe more on the B2B side, consulting kind of larger institutions, but being part of a company now that is much broader in scope, and not just about kind of servicing larger businesses, but also kind of democratizing the ability for people to get access to do these sort of things, even if it just is in crypto right now. I think there's a big use case to use crypto to be able to democratize some of that globally. And I think for me, that's something that like is really heartwarming, but also is really just amazing to kind of drive change and be a part of that industry. I think the second thing for me is to very much see a much more kind of gender equal workforce in FinTech, like we spoke about. I think making, you know, providing for a cultural environment and kind of the right maybe education to get women excited about kind of joining these financial companies, getting involved in technology, and knowing that you don't need to be a super technologically savvy person to be part of the journey, I think is really important. And I'd love to see that, because I am not a quant, I'm not a developer, I'm not writing Python code, but I bring other skill sets. And I think that's something that I'd love to kind of see other women take part of and understand the value of the space. I think it's a really cool space to be in.
Fabulous. What a response. And I think that really is, you know, I think that although that's the dream, I think a portion of that can come true as reality. And there's steps that can be taken, you know, in the next months and years that can make some of that really a reality. And I think that, you know, there's so much scope for this. And I'm not going to touch on, you know, the environmental impact of cryptocurrency as it goes global, because I think that will, you know, I'm not going to blow up Twitter again over that, but you know,
it's being worked on though. I think yes, I think there's challenges to that, of course, and there's challenges to generally kind of environmental sustainability across many industries. And it's very important to look at that and think about strategies to kind of alleviate some of the impacts that we bring to our environment. And that is something being worked on in the crypto space at multiple levels. But I think we all have, you know, a part to play in that across all industries. And I think
and I think that we have to remember in this discussion that's what is the cryptocurrency offsetting in the traditional banking system, and then look at, you know, the energy consumed in traditional banking as well, and as an offset to understand really the true impact, you know, before we start calling catastrophe, if you would.
Definitely, it's a very valid point. I completely agree. And yes, I do hope that my dream will somewhat become a reality, and hopefully I will see that in my lifetime.
I hope so. That would be awesome. So the last thing I have, and I hope this is going to go smooth. So recommendations. So do you have a book or podcast that you like to recommend to people?
Yes, that is a good one. The podcast that I have been listening to recently that I find gives me a lot of just, you know, interesting ideas, kind of creativity being sparked, is the Stanford, oh goodness, it's called the Stanford, I think, entrepreneurial podcast. It's basically,
we'll put it in the show notes anyway to link for people.
It's basically, yeah, it's the Stanford Entrepreneurial Podcast, and basically Stanford out in California is a school that is very much associated with not just Silicon Valley, but a lot of successful entrepreneurs that have come up in this space across FinTech and across many industries. And they basically have a number of the professors there and teachers there basically interview CEOs and founders of startups. But they don't just kind of look at startups that, you know, are early stage, but they look at startups and speak to like the founders of Stripe, for example, or the founders of Airbnb, and they're able to really kind of, I think honestly and transparently kind of have really interesting conversations about the challenges they had when they first kind of started out and where they are today. And I've just learned so much, and I've been able to apply it to a lot of the ways that I think, whether it's like a marketing idea, or it's how to like build a product in a really like customer centric way that's like totally off the beaten path, or just like these really interesting nuggets that sometimes if I'm going for a walk, I know it's not a very like, you know, personally exciting podcast, but it's more business oriented, but it really, it just brings a lot of value to me, and it just gets me thinking, and it makes you realize that, you know, at the end of the day, everybody's just figuring it out. We're all just a bit of a work in progress, and we're all just kind of figuring it out as we go. And I think that's the best way to be innovative, and like just strive for success, but be okay with making mistakes along the way, and giving back and sharing those insights with others. And I really enjoy the podcast.
Cool. I think we'll have to check that one out, and that will be in the show notes as well for people so that they can follow up on that one. And the last recommendation is a song that always brings a smile to your face.
Any song by Billy Joel, who is from Hicksville, Long Island, whereas, as you may know, I'm a Long Island girl. So any song by Billy Joel makes me think of Long Island sunsets, and really good Italian restaurants, and just, really nice memories of New York. So I'm a big Billy Joel fan.
Fabulous. What a great recommendation. I love it. That's a great one. Well, look, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been a really, you've really opened my eyes so much more to this. I'm just going to have such an in-depth conversation with my husband now on all of this, because he loves all cryptocurrencies, and but you really made it in a translatable way. I think that you really opened up on the whole market, on where it's going, the direction, and how it interacts with things, and really the future. And I really appreciate, your insights into that. And thank you so much.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that. I hope it's helpful, and happy to connect with any of your listeners. And I really appreciate the opportunity.
It's been super. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Allison.